Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to present our topic on using the Tableau CRM for year-over-year admissions analytics. And we know how important it is to be providing relevant information to our education partners, so we thank you for your participation today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. You should have come into the meeting on mute, so we do ask if you stay on mute to reduce any background noise. And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box in the Zoom at the bottom of the screen. And we are recording today's session, so you will get a copy of the recording after today. So with that, I will turn it over to Carol Thomas.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. I'm very excited to be presenting on this topic. Currently, I am Senior Vice President Forelli, and I have responsibility for our Salesforce practice. But I come to this presentation with some extensive experience, both as the CIO, as the executive managing marketing and communications, and a vice president over admissions, both graduate and undergraduate. So the topic of admissions reporting, and particularly the trend analysis and historical reporting that we are asked to do on a regular basis, is very near and dear to me as one of the people that used to have to create those reports and get them delivered in a timely fashion. So I'm glad you're able to join us today. Particularly to talk about some of the challenges when we're changing systems for this kind of reporting. So what I'd like to do is kind of unpack what I mean by historical reporting. And the first is to really define expectations. We have problems when we switch platforms, determining what the underlying reporting architecture might be, unless we're lucky enough to work at an institution that has a well-established data warehouse or operational data store against which they're able to make adjustments and do this reporting. Most schools that I've worked with in my lengthy career in higher education did not have such an architecture, and particularly one for handling applicant data. So I want to today explore some options and some potential solutions for that, describe a conceptual framework that I have personally used in my work and also worked with a number of clients to develop, and then show you some of the approaches in Tableau CRM to implementing some of these activities. I hope we'll have time at the end for some questions and conversation. What we won't talk about today, just so we're clear, is operational reporting through Salesforce Reports and Dashboards. I will show you a couple, but that is not the content for today. We're not going to talk about other Einstein analytics or Tableau CRM functionality, such as predictive analytics. That's certainly a topic I would love to explore in another webinar. And we won't specifically talk about non-Salesforce-based solutions, but I did want to emphasize that the concept and approach that I describe here is one that can apply to many other CRM and reporting environments using other tool sets. So before I start, I'd be interested in knowing a little bit about you and who's in the audience. So I'm curious who's here from admissions and recruiting, from IT, from institutional research, or if you're from some other area of your school, that would be helpful to know. And we'll take a couple of seconds and let you respond.
Okay, looks like IT has it with 60% of the audience and admissions recruiting 40% of the audience.
Terrific, thank you. That's helpful to know. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. So really, I want to describe a little bit about what I've seen in my career and experience as a consultant as the problem. As an admissions director or as an admissions leader, I need to report out year-over-year trend data regarding applicants, admits, and deposits, shorthand for people who've committed to coming to the institution. At a minimum, I need to be able to look at that in aggregate, and I need to be able to also examine that in great detail, with some data points being more relevant to some institutions than others. But typically, we're wanting to look at a distribution of our pool at any stage of the funnel by state, by major, by athletic status, or by any other of hundreds of variables that we might be considering as we are seeking to assess our overall performance against our enrollment goals, and also quickly identify trends and areas of concern that we may want to address both operationally and strategically. To do this in this position, I need prior year point in time data. So for example, in many schools, there's a once a week report out to the community that's based on data extracted at a particular time and on a particular date. For me to do this year over year reporting, I need that going back in time. I also need to be able to get that for the current year as well. I need that data in a place I can access and analyze. I need it in such a way that I can deliver that content to the community, whatever that means for my institution. And typically I want to do this myself, producing all the necessary materials quickly and controlling and managing the data. Now I say that coming from a long career as a CIO and recognizing that resources in IT were often constrained, and the work that I needed to do on the admission side wasn't always able to get the attention that it needed. So I wanted to make sure the offices that I managed had the opportunity to understand how to use the data that they had access to, which was typically a very rich and abundant data set, and really manage and control it against the admissions cycle's requirements. This is by no means a question of the IT or other staff's commitment to our work. It was just a matter of resource management. And the other thing that we know that happens and that we've all experienced is there's changes happening all the time. There's both changes in our enrollment modeling practices and our financially leveraging policy or in our systems. And so in this case, we're really talking about if we have switched from another system or are switching to Salesforce, how do we address this particular topic? Maybe we had it figured out in our old system and we're not sure what to do now. And we really need to make sure we have the tools at our fingertips and we've thought it through well in order to feel confident that we can continue this important reporting track. So some typical questions that arise in this kind of transition is, do we need to import all of our prior year detail into Salesforce? So do we need to put all the applicants from 2020, 2019, 2018 into the new system? And the answer is an emphatic no. Can we do this reporting ourselves? Typically, yes, with some training and some understanding of how to use the available tool set, which I'll provide a bit of an overview on today. And then, can we really transition to a new way? And the answer is yes. With some preparation and some one-time work, we can position an admissions office to be in a good place in terms of this very important type of reporting, and both maintaining what is the current standard for reporting, but also extending that into more detail and more depth. So the tool that I will be talking about today is the Tableau CRM tool, which is part of the Salesforce ecosystem. It's the new name and new functionality given to Einstein Analytics. As many of you may have known, Salesforce purchased Tableau a couple of years ago, and they've really made some extensive improvements to the user interface, particularly in the Einstein Analytics platform, and now under the rebranded name Tableau CRM. Tableau CRM is designed to work directly with Salesforce data, so I could pull in a data flow directly from the Salesforce CRM, Sales Cloud or Service Cloud, or other sources of data, or it can be used to connect to external data sources. It provides standard dashboarding, fairly extensive dashboarding tools with visualizations where necessary, but it also can produce those things that we love so much in admissions called charts, just charts of numbers and data that show us that the trend numbers. If this is something that you're interested in and you don't have yet, if you were going to use Tableau in your institutional Salesforce environment, you would need to license the appropriate Tableau CRM Analytics Studio from Salesforce and then configure the appropriate permissions. But if you're just exploring right now and thinking about how you would use this, you do not need to make that investment yet. You can learn the tool through a variety of tools that are available through the Salesforce Trailhead. If you're one of those who likes to collect certifications, I will tell you the Einstein Analytics and Discovery Consultant certification is tough, but it's a really, really good track to walk through to really understand what's possible with this tool set. But if you're really just wanting to make sure that you can have access to an environment where you can learn and design and test with your own data, you can spin up your own Einstein Developer Edition of Salesforce and then request that it have Tableau CRM attached to it. And then even more so, if you've implemented the education data architecture in Salesforce or are interested in that, you can also include the education data architecture in your developer edition. And you might want to consider exploring an offering that's directly from Salesforce that looks at current year data only, that's called a recruiting and admissions analytics template. And I've provided a link here to how you can get access to that if you have EDA installed in the environment that you're working in. That is a prerequisite. That template really gives you a very good jumpstart on current year reporting in the analytics toolset if that's something that you're interested in. But back to why Tableau CRM. And I want to talk about some of the key functionality that was important to me as I was building out this this process for the schools that I was at, and also the work that I've done with our clients here at Forelli. And the first is that in Tableau CRM, I can import and store data from multiple data sources. So I can bring in non-Salesforce current year data from spreadsheets or prior year data from spreadsheets that I have configured to be able to be read by Tableau. I can do a direct feed of current year Salesforce data using a Salesforce direct connection. So I can really build out multiple sets of data that I can use for a variety of purposes. At one school, we've worked with a school that exports on a weekly basis, their entire applicant pool with all the relevant data that they might ever want to analyze to provide to external vendors who are helping them with their marketing or their search process or other tools that vendors sometimes provide to schools. That data set can be imported straight into Tableau CRM and analyzed by the people that use it on a regular basis to perform a number of reporting tools. So this can be simple, this can be complex, the data structure can be complex, and the number of records can be extensive. For those of you who are familiar with Salesforce's storage on the Sales Cloud side of the house, you know, as when your storage gets up to a certain level, you start having to pay more. In analytics, that model is quite different, and the ability to store tons of records is available to you on the analytics side. Another piece of key functionality is that the Tableau CRM can transform data as you're bringing it into the system to match up with current requirements. So one that I've seen frequently is when majors change. It might be math education last year in the system that was in use last year, and this year it's education : math. They're the same major, the major requirements haven't changed, just the way we've described them to applicants has changed. I can transform within the Tableau CRM toolset that data so everything matches up and all my tables align correctly. And finally, and I mentioned later, this is kind of the secret sauce. When I figured out this compare tables option within Tableau CRM, it made my life a lot easier. The compare tables functionality is what allows me to have 2020 data in one column, 2019 in another, 2018 in another, using that very straightforward out-of-the-box filtering. So an approach. I mentioned earlier, you know, my first foray into this approach was because I needed to do this work myself. Subsequently, I've worked with a number of schools who have been in situations where they're transitioning to new systems, where they've never really had perhaps an effective approach to doing this year-over-year reporting, or they've lost staff and they just really need help. And so developing a replicable approach has been important. And that approach consists of 5 steps. Collect all of the prior year data that you have available to you and determine what to use. And as you're collecting that, validate your current year data. So I'll show you how we do that. Convert anything that you're going to use from prior years into database records that can be read easily into Tableau CRM. Import that data into Tableau CRM. Run any transformations that you need to run in order to get the year-over-year data to be comparable. And then present results through the Tableau CRM dashboards. So I want to share with you a case study. This is a school that I've worked with recently that switched to Salesforce and had a rough year last year in trying to do this kind of work. And this year we worked with them to get them to a place where rather than taking almost a full day to produce their weekly reports, it's down to 15 minutes. First, some disclaimers. All the data that's presented here is sample data. It's not attributed to a particular school. The information is meant to be illustrative and not to necessarily draw any conclusions from, to really test data. If you're interested in this, you want to plan on some deeper training, or we're happy to provide consultation to you to help you adapt your own scenarios to this model. And the screenshots that I share with you today will provide an initial view of the results, but it is nowhere near as rich as the live experience of using Tableau CRM to analyze the data. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that this is a sort of flat, non-interactive presentation of the information that really is much more powerful when you're using the tool itself. So the case study I mentioned is of a school that converted to Salesforce last year. They're a small private liberal arts college. Their admissions director is charged with creating the weekly admissions reports. To do this, until this model was introduced, required using multiple data queries in Salesforce, multiple prior year spreadsheets, and taking multiple hours every week to produce. He really wanted timely and accurate data to present for both current year and historical reporting. That's pretty much what all of us want in this field when we're doing this work. So the first thing we set about doing was validating the current year data. We reviewed and identified different definitions that had been used, particularly of applicants. So reports that he was running were not balancing effectively. They weren't each displaying the same information. And that can happen depending on how you count different application statuses, depending on how you've implemented admissions in your Salesforce environment. In their case, they had an applicant status that indicated someone was an inquiry. So those were clearly not applicants. But then they had statuses that said an applicant started the application. They have submitted the application, but the application isn't complete. And depending on who wrote the reports, they got different definitions of the data. So we worked with them to make sure that every single report that reported applicant data was using exactly the same definition of what an applicant meant, and that was documented in the comments on the report itself. That was in the standard Salesforce reports and dashboards. At this school, no simple mechanism had been provided for the review of current year data. So we developed for them a dashboard that they could look at quickly to see if the data were making sense. We recommended building out Salesforce dashboards and reports to validate all results. And just in doing this, we saved several hours a week and provided to the school an audit tool that they regularly run to validate current year data. In fact, just before this webinar, I got an email saying something looked wrong and they had changed the definition, and I showed them how to change the report and everything was fine. That report looks something like this. And I know this is a little small, maybe hard to read, but this is a dashboard at this institution that they can actually look at, and they can quickly peruse to see, do these decision codes look like the correct decision codes? Are my majors correct? And surprisingly, depending on how the data are managed, sometimes, you know, the wrong major for a graduate major is selected for undergrad, or other kinds of activities can happen, or some data just doesn't look right. So as if you know Salesforce reports and dashboards, you know that a report is written to create that block on the dashboard, and you can run that report and sort it and see what the anomalies are in the data. Then the second thing was to collect their prior year data. So for each prior year reporting cycle, we collected, you can collect either the detailed source data. So if you're, suppose you have 10,000 applicants and you're exporting on a weekly basis the data about all 10,000 applicants, you can really get some very rich information and make some interesting observations of your data when you import that into the CRM tool over 26 or 30 or 40 weeks of an admission cycle. That's a very interesting exercise to do, and one that I have done, and I'll show you some results of that later in this presentation. Or you can use summative data, so that spreadsheet that we send that shows us apps, applicants, admits, and deposits by day can be that summative as well. For this case study, the weekly reports were produced via a summative spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet looked something like this. Yours may look different, but most admissions offices are doing something like this. This is just a subset of what they were using, but it shows from 2016 to 2020 on that particular date, and that date is relative to placement in the month. So it's the last Friday or a Friday in the month, what the applicant pool really looked like. Similarly, they do an activity that's related to majors. And this is where actually some of the more complicated work can do that requires those transformations that I mentioned earlier, when the name of a major changes or how we display it to an applicant through the applicant portal changes. With all of that data, we created an output from analytics that gave them the summative data for the prior 5 years. And then we had a blank column for them. And we said, okay, now we have to go about the activity of merging our current year data with our prior year data. And we started not by automating it and not by using CRM for Tableau, but simply using baseline Salesforce reports and dashboards to determine the numbers that we needed to fill in for March 12th of 2021. And those dashboards looked something like this. These are, again, straight off of the reports and dashboards that are part of the Salesforce platform. And we plugged the numbers in, and then we tested them for reasonability. Do they look correct? And from there, we actually had a completed report. So the question became, why analytics? If I can do it this way, and it takes me 15 minutes to enter the data from a dashboard that I know I've validated and is accurate, why would I spend the time to move to Tableau CRM or Einstein Analytics? And the answer really is that when the data is simply summative, you could stop here. But this school really wanted to know more. It wanted to be able to analyze, present, and trend data and extend their reporting capabilities. And also, if you happen to have detail rather than summary data, I would argue that analytics is essential for getting meaningful data that you can use for decision making. So we've done the first step. We've validated our current year data. We have located and organized the prior year data. And now we need to figure out, okay, how do we get that all into analytics? So the prior year data in this case was in spreadsheets, and we needed to reorganize that data so that it would be useful in building out dashboards on the analytics side. So we analyzed the source data to determine all the individual rows and columns essentially that needed to be in that data set in order to produce those dashboards. We had specific considerations related to dates, the date of prior year reports and making sure we were capturing that, the details of the data underlying to make sure we didn't lose anything, and to develop the data structure that would give us the ability to produce the reports that we wanted to produce. So essentially, we were going from what's at the top here, which is a piece of their existing spreadsheet, and we were turning it into a set of rows that were complete with data points that could be used and manipulated to produce any kind of report that they wanted based on the summative data. So you'll even notice there's a column here for sort order. Their Excel spreadsheet was not in alphabetical order. In order for me to control how the data are displayed, I needed to be very explicit because standard sorting wasn't going to work. That sort column becomes very important in terms of positioning other kinds of grouping of data. And one of the things to know is that even if you display that on your dashboard, you can go back and hide it once you have everything set up the way you want it. So it looks very neat and tidy. So we needed to import then, after we had set the data set up correctly, import and transform the data. So what we did was take the prior year data in CSV format. We had 26 weeks worth of data for this school. We format it so it could be read by analytics, and then import it into analytics. After we did the import, we wanted to perform all the data transformations that were necessary, and we wanted to append all 26 files together so that when we were executing a query, we were selecting the week we wanted, getting that week's results, but not having to maintain 26 separate data sets. To do this in analytics, we use data sets and recipes. So as I mentioned, the goal was to build one large data set of all their historical data and all the relevant current year data. For the historical data, we had to import each week's data, perform the transformations, and append the data together. And those are the two tools within Tableau CRM that are used. So this is just a screenshot of where you go to create the data set. And this is where we would say, here's the file I want to upload. So this is the data from March 13th that I'm going to upload. I'm going to review for proper data formats. I like to mention here that one of the things that was a challenge early on was determining how to manage dates. How Salesforce manages dates is very robust and somewhat complex. So sometimes I simply turn dates into dimensions rather than having to deal with them as date fields. For anybody that does database work, you may understand what that means, but there's 3 data types here that are available: dimensions that are indicated by the A, that's character data; measures that are characterized here by what looks like a snail to me. But I believe it's actually a measuring tape, and that's a measure. And then obviously dates, which are characterized by the calendar entry next to the field. Those you can adjust as you do this import. You can say, I don't want it to come in as a date. I want it to come in as a dimension. You can do various data management right here, but you can do even more when you build out a recipe. So this is one of the great improvements that Salesforce has released recently, at least probably within the last 6 months. Prior to this nice graphical interface, it was a little bit challenging to figure out what you were actually doing when you were building a recipe. It wasn't quite as visual as this, but right now what this particular recipe is doing is pulling in 4 different weeks full of data, the weekly data that I showed how I had transformed it. And then it's appending them all together into a data set, the purple symbol to the right, that's called it's the year over year 2020 to 2016 compilation of all the data. There's no transformations going on there. It's just simply joining those files together. If I want to do transformations, I can do the same thing. In this particular case, I have an input data set that's been built. I have a master data set that's been built to which I'm adding the next week's data. And this is another way of doing that. And I'm only transforming data on the input set. And in this case, I'm saying, let me bucket some values, the run date. When I ran this report, let me bucket those into week 1, week 2, and other. In this particular case, this was the test example, which gives me the data that you'll see on a subsequent dashboard where the client wanted just to see the week of the cycle that they were reporting on. Once all the data is input, once the transformations have occurred, we can present through the Tableau CRM dashboards. And I want to just reiterate that the secret sauce here is the compare tables functionality that's available in that dashboarding tool. That allows us to take this, which is the raw data that you saw coming in, import that data, do some transformations, and then transform it to this, which by this I mean, I'm going to just turn on my little pointer here. I mean this kind of a format, which will look very familiar to people who do work in admissions, where we have the prior year, the prior year, and further prior years summarized into columns by the year filter. And that's one of the ways to really make this hum. But this is not the dashboard. This is simply the building out the query, building out the way we want to view the data. And once we're done with that, we get something that looks like this. This is a subset, not fancy, very raw, that shows us that for the current year on week 1, which the as of date, I ran that data was February 8th. I'm comparing that to week 1 of the cycle that actually begins in March for the prior years. And I'm aggregating all of that data so that I can see the comparison between 2021 and all of the prior years. One of the things you don't see here is something else that you could add, which is the percent change between last year and this year, or between the prior year and this year. If those are things that you're interested in, those are very easy to change in that exact same compare table format by simply writing the formula to calculate the percent change and adding it to your table. But for the school that this work was done for, this was very helpful to them in many ways. And because of the way they chose to put this together in their dashboard, it was possible for us all also to distribute it easily to the community without having to acquire additional licenses. Now, the community can't go in and do drill down activity on this or do more interaction with it, but they can see the data in a meaningful way. Some other examples that apply the same approach. This school had a very detailed data source. It had 1 line per applicant per week. So we could do some very deeper dives into the data. You'll see across the top here some tabs. There's a summary tab that shows that information that we always want to see, which is the total apps, admits, and deposits. Then we can see, in this case, they wanted to look at state breakdowns by apps, admits, deposits, and they wanted to look at programs. What's also added here is this opportunity to filter the data. They had in their data set whether a student was a recruited athlete or not. They also had gender. Those were the 2 that we chose to put on this dashboard. We could have put any other field on there to really look at a subset of the data and have this table respond. Similarly, we could look at the data and put in some conditional formatting that would tell us what was looking good or what was looking not so good in terms of meeting either new enrollment goals or just general enrollment targets. So in this case, the school was interested in recruiting in California, Georgia, and Florida. And they were watching those applications and they were watching those admits very closely. And so we simply highlighted with a color so that the decision makers could see quickly where things looked to be going well or not going so well. You could actually think of this as a sort of a stoplight if you wanted to, and format it so you could see red, yellow, and green, and then no color for things that were didn't fall within certain parameters or certain ranges. Another school looked at it slightly differently. They wanted to look at it by app type and residency and look for trends. This was a school that was a public institution that was concerned about tuition rates being different for residents and non-residents. And so they were very interested in subsets of that data pool so they could see what was happening there. This school did not have a deep drill down into detailed records. They also had summative reports. They just had more data on those summative reports than the first school we talked about. But that data did allow them to do some additional graphical displays of the data. In this case, the board really liked seeing displays such as this. So this was one of the tools that they could use to report out what was going on in their admission pool. When they decided to add some filters to that, and here I've got it filtered by a residency and application type. So freshman transfer, in-state, out-of-state. This is all of the applicants. This, I'm choosing a parameter here that will result in showing me residents, by all application types, and I can see that the apps and admits are going up, but the deposits are going down. That's an interesting trend I might want to explore some more. Or in this case, I'm looking at all resident types for first-time students, and I'm seeing another interesting trend, which is a little like the reverse hockey stick that we like to see in admissions. So, just pointing out things that need to be looked at and considered in the data. So just to summarize, if you've got summative data, this can work. If you have detailed data, this can work. It becomes a rich data set from which to, regardless of the source, from which to provide simplified reporting, validated against and compared against your current year data. So I just want to say that Forelli can help, and this is one of the areas that I'm quite passionate about. So I really do hope it gives you a flavor of what's possible. We can help to design and implement your year-over-year historical reporting in Salesforce using Tableau CRM, or in another CRM or admission system using Power BI, which is another tool set we use a lot, or other combinations of admissions and reporting tools. And I would be happy to provide a more detailed and live demo on how these come together if you would reach out to your account executive. Just wasn't comfortable doing a live demo on a webinar. And with that, I will close and see if there are any questions.
Okay, there are no questions currently in the chat. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to come off of mute and ask them, or you can feel free to still type it into the chat window.
I got a quick question.
Great.
So I noticed that you had a lot of those reports on dashboards. Does Tableau CRM allow you to put those dashboards or charts inside of student records and different areas within Salesforce, so that way reps can look at it while they're talking to students or working with students?
Well, the answer is yes. If you have a full analytics license available to a user, you have all sorts of flexibility. You also have the ability to export this out into, if you use Quip, into Quip, you can export to an image file that you could load somewhere. But that would be an interesting thing to explore. I've not thought about that. That's an interesting question. What is often done, because dashboards are really not meant for printing, as you might be well aware, is taking an image of that dashboard and putting that in the email that goes to the community, right? So that people can see what's going on. But I haven't really thought about how you would attach it to a student record or rep, other than to have a full license that would get you in there.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Certainly something I'd be interested to talk about more, because off the top of my head, I'm thinking through the use case. We could certainly chat about it some more.
If nobody else has questions, I have another one.
Go right ahead.
Kind of following into that one, are you able to do any kind of snapshots on those dashboards or reports, kind of like you get to do with the regular Salesforce reporting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. And interestingly, depending on how you construct this, you can actually even snapshot your data. So that's one of the things I've been experimenting with of late, to see how many different data sets it would take. I mean, obviously I want to drive off of one master data set, but if I need sub data sets, or if I need snapshots of the data, you certainly can do that. Just the pick, the structure.
So if you are able to do that, are you able to do the comparisons between snapshots also? So if you do like a monthly snapshot and then pull those all together to say, here's my yearly differences. Okay.
Yep. So, I mean, it would take some time and effort to think through exactly how you want to do that. But yeah, the answer is yes. Okay. You can use multiple data sets within a dashboard. You can compare multiple data sets. You can use multiple data sets within a compare table. So you do get a lot of flexibility there.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. It is a very powerful tool.
Carol, can you project future data? So like if you're looking at a date and time like April 1, but you want to know where were we at April 25 last year and how do we get there? Is that possible to change that?
It is possible. And I don't have that available to show you, but that's exactly what I was doing. I knew where I needed to be May 1st in order to meet, a certain target by June 1st, you know, from analyzing the data. And because I have all the historical data in a single data set, I can project that out and track it with my current year data fairly easily. Yeah. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's one of the reasons I like having a, I've only showed you one configuration of a data set. I've got there's multiple different ways that that could be configured, because you're not going to have current year data to look at that point, but you can project out by a calculation. If I know I'm growing by 5% a week or whatever the number is, I'm just making that up. I can see where if I'm currently at 200 and I need to be at 300, what that rate's going to be. So yeah, it's pretty cool how you can do all that. That was the number one question I used to get asked as the VP for admissions. Like, what's it going to take to get to this number by then? So yeah, important to know.
That question has not changed. So
I'm sure it hasn't. I'm sure it's gotten even tougher. And just not, you know, and with applications, it's a slightly easier a conversation than with deposits for sure. So, but actually that analysis told us at one school that where their problem was in the pace that they were generating applications. And if they didn't speed up the pace of application generation, they weren't going to make other enrollment targets. They had gotten kind of complacent around the admission numbers until we did that kind of an analysis with them. So as we know, there's no complacency in admissions, but that was a few years ago. So
Got another off the wall kind of question. Is there any way, if you're building out reports, is there any way to create alerts if your analytics start to hit certain levels?
I do believe there is. I've not done that. Certainly you can do a subscribe and you can see what's going on, but I believe there is a way to do those alerts. I'll be happy to follow up with you, Andy, and get a precise answer to that, but I'm pretty sure there is.
Thank you.
There are no crazy questions in this. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the group? Just a reminder, in case anybody else does have a question, I'll give them a minute. But we do have upcoming webinars, and you can find that on our website, forelli.com/what's happening. And that is a list of what's upcoming, as well as past recorded demos. So that's where our library of recorded demos or webinars live. Additionally, we are recording today's webinar, so you will get a copy of that via email. And another thing that we like to ask those that attend the webinars, if you have any topics of interest that you would like us to present on, please submit those to info@forelli.com. We want to make sure that we're presenting on topical information that's relevant to you all. Additionally, if you have follow-up questions after today's session, feel free to reach out to us either through info@forelli.com, our 888 line, or if you're currently working with an account manager already, can reach us any number of those ways. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Appreciate everybody's time this afternoon, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.